Hey, thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. To unlock the extended bonus conversation, sign up at patreon.com/thecreateunknown. Now, on with the show.
Are uniquely Australian candies like powdered sugared tarantulas and rock candy deadly venomous snakes.
So
welcome to The Create Unknown. I am Kevin Lieber. With me, as always, is Matthew Tabor. We're doing this episode a bit quick and dirty because things have been very crazy for the both of us lately. Yeah. Matt, you just got back from Australia. Last week, I spent in Philadelphia shooting a thing that I got hired for that you will all see in mid-December. And what we want to talk about here today, though, is networking stuff because I know it's definitely must be hot on your mind since that's sort of been what you've been doing in the upside down over there in Australia, right?
Yeah, we had some workshops with Changer Studios. They're doing some really cool stuff in Australia and New Zealand. And so, yeah, it was New York to Las Vegas to Auckland to Brisbane to Melbourne to Las Vegas, which is where I am now. So yeah, still not even home. But in those workshops, the first one was kind of people who were earlier on, not necessarily just getting started, but in that like really early growth stage, primarily.
YouTubers?
YouTube. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there were a couple people who were really starting fresh, and then some who, you know, they're small and they want to not be small. And then in Melbourne, we talked with some people who have done it all really successfully, you know, people with 6-figure subscribers and stuff like that in all sorts of different areas. So one thing that came up, kind of a theme in all of it, was the social side of all of this stuff, whether it's creatively, because that's when we say networking, well, let's back up on that. Networking is so many different things, right? Yeah. There's the creative stuff where it's, you know, it's like, how do I work with other people, even if it's not explicit? Like, how do I get involved in a creative community so my stuff will get better? And then there's like the professional networking, where it's like, oh, what can I do that's going to, you know, land me like some money or something, you know, some kind of professional relationship that results in a brand deal or sponsorship or access to facilities. I mean, it's across the board. And so all of that stuff, though, is generally people-based networking. So whether somebody's just getting started or, yeah, I mean, we talk about it, don't we? We talk about this stuff every single day.
Well, I was going to say that it doesn't even really matter what industry you're in at all. Like, obviously, like networking has been a thing a lot longer than the internet, let alone YouTube have. But it's fresh on my mind in a way because I was just on a call recently to go over a panel that I am leading. I'm moderating in a couple of weeks in Tokyo that I'm really excited about. But the point is, this panel is made up of professionals in different industries, okay? So in the games industry, as well as the traditional media industry. And the people on the games industry side are saying, hey, how do we get in with the traditional media people to expand our reach and our audience and our influence and our legitimacy? Because in a lot of ways, it sounds like the gaming industry, not unlike the YouTube industry, has kind of a failure of legitimacy in the eyes of older media. So that the people who work in games industry are trying to get the accolades or the attention of old media. And then guess what? The old media people are trying to get like the influence and the younger generation and the eyeballs of the games industry. Very similar to what's happening with YouTube. And so these people are trying to build bridges between these industries and all trying to figure it out, because it is so nascent in tapping into like the resources that one has and the other doesn't.
The newer people who want the legitimacy want to be taken seriously. And the ones like in the traditional space don't want to come off as how do you do fellow kids memes.
Yeah, boomers. Okay, yeah. Boomer.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, which, I just proved to be a boomer by using the example from like 7 years ago instead of 7 minutes ago. Yeah. So I'm a failure on that front. But there's a big personal component to this stuff too, because some people love talking to other people and going places and just being like, oh, there are 100 people in a room. Like, I want to talk to 98 of them in the next hour. And other people, most of the ones I know on YouTube are just not like that. They're not that type of person. The personality is quite a bit different. It's a lot more solitary. There's like, it ranges from just not really wanting to do it to having really serious anxiety about having to do that kind of thing. So, that's I think why it's so important that we talk about this, because everybody, no matter where you're at geographically, or whether you're like 15 or 75, you've got your own challenges with this stuff, and it's extremely important to do it and to work within the confines of who you are.
Exactly. And with that, it's also like, as personal as it is with the personal and temperamental challenges that you may have, it's all very kind of the same thing, meaning like whether you're on the YouTube side or you're on the TV side, or you're like a vacuum cleaner salesman and you go to like vacuum cleaner salesman conventions where you need to make connections with people who sell like rug cleaners, like whatever it is, it's kind of the same thing. We go to all sorts of different conferences and different conventions for different things, not just YouTube, but they're all the same thing. It's a bunch of people who feel kind of awkward, some less so than others, trying to figure out what kind of things that they can do for each other, really, to work together in the future. And I mean, this trip that you just went on to Australia literally came from a totally impromptu 5-minute conversation at VidCon.
That's right. Yeah. It is kind of crazy. I hadn't thought of it like that until Fred and Ant are the two guys at Changer, and I met Fred at VidCon this summer, and it was like somebody he knows, a creator from Australia, was talking to you, and I was just standing there and he was just standing there, and we started talking, and I bet we talked for like 5 minutes. That was it. 5 minutes. And then 4 months later, I'm like touring Australia with them,
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't even see them the rest of VidCon. We just went to email after that.
That's what I was going to ask. What were the next steps? Like, how do you go from 5-minute conversation with complete random person you accidentally started talking to then being invited to like across the globe to do a bunch of really cool stuff?
Mm-hmm. So I didn't know Fred or Changer or any of those guys really. I know a few Australian YouTubers, but I'm not an expert on the scene there, So here's the big networking secret, okay? The one thing that everybody is interested in, and this is like sector, or I mean like worldwide, right? Independent of whatever you're doing. And I mean, like this can be making friends at a bar. Like the same principle applies. The thing that pretty much everybody is interested in is themselves. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I knew you were going to say that. Talking about themselves.
Yeah. And if you have a legitimate interest in just getting to know what people do with their time and their lives, then it's really easy. You're not even networking. You're not doing a thing where it's like, I want to convert this person into an important contact. It's not. It's just a curiosity about what other people are doing. And so I didn't know anything about Australian YouTube. So I was happy to ask Fred, basically, what do you do? Tell me about what you do. And I was sincerely interested in his answers. And then I asked him follow-up questions. So, is it tough to talk to somebody for 5 minutes when they're really sincerely interested in who you are and what you do? Absolutely not. That's, if somebody comes up to you and they're just into you, you're going to feel good about it, right?
But the important part is asking questions, because, you and I temperamentally are very different. And that's actually one of the reasons that I like to go to events with you is that you are more of an extrovert than I am, and you have an easier time striking up conversation. I really don't. I never have in my entire life. Like, I've never been a person that was comfortable talking to strangers.
That's such a lie, though, because when you were bartending so many years ago, like, you were a really popular bartender. Everybody wanted to go to the place when Kevin was working. And you talked to people like you did exactly you may not have liked it or not, you may not have been thrilled. Like, I'm going to go out and talk to people for 7 hours as I work, but you're good at it and people enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I never thought about it like that, but when you're bartending, not to go off the rails too much, but I had something to do. While I had an activity while I was talking, and that makes a huge difference for me. Like, while I was bartending, I'm doing a job, I can clean things, I can serve different customers, I can get them a drink, I can ask them, hey, how do you like the drink? Do you want me to make it differently next time? Like I am kind of plugged in to not feeling awkward. Actually, I never felt awkward at all. That's what I liked. One of the things I really liked about bartending is I felt like I had a purpose, and that the talking was a lot more natural that way. So when I walk into a room at a convention where there's just a crowd of people milling about, and I'm milling about, and you know what? Often the only thing to do is eat hors d'oeuvres and drink, which quite honestly, neither of those two things I'm comfortable with doing casually in public. Man, it's a whole different dynamic for me to just be able to walk around at that point and be like, hey, what do you do, stranger?
I think of the thing in Office Space where the Bobs are interviewing the one guy, and they're like, so what is it you do here? Yeah. No, you're right, though. There's a massive difference between something like bartending, where you have 85 built-in mechanisms to disengage from a conversation, to start up a conversation, to continue one, to distract yourself, from purely standing there and making eye contact. When you're in a convention room or something like that and everybody's standing around, it really is what you said. You've got food, drink, which if you really commit to the drinking one, if it's during the day, you're going to drink yourself into the bathroom in 15 minutes if you just slam water and soda. And if it's a nighttime thing where you're drinking more than water and soda, that can very well go badly on the networking side. That's a seriously high-risk venture, and it is truly a sink or swim prospect. But yeah, you've got what you've got and what you brought, which, maybe it's this sounds weird, but if you have a bag of some kind, then you've almost always got something to do with your hands. So if you're wearing a backpack, it's not weird to hold onto the straps of the backpack as you're talking. It's just not. I wear a side bag a lot. Well, I can rest my arm on that bag and half of my hands are dealt with then.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have anything at all, you're really just sitting there or standing there like with your hands in your pockets or not. And it seems like such a stupid little detail, but it matters when you're in a conversation for 10 minutes. Like, how do I stand and what do I do with my hands?
But you also, I'm so glad you brought up the bag, because I've seen you have that baseball bag, right?
Yeah.
The Rawlings. Yeah. So Matt
Mm-hmm.
has this really nice bag that is basically modeled after a baseball glove. Is that fair to say?
It's made out of the exact same leather that Rawlings uses on the gloves. So,
okay, right.
Yeah, that line of stuff they use the same material to make it, but it's a bag. It's not shaped like a glove or anything. It's,
no. That'd be funny.
It's a standard like rectangular side bag, but it's nice, and it's got the Rawlings logo, and most people who played baseball as a kid had a glove, like a Rawlings glove at some point. So like they recognize that. It's a good kind of conversation piece.
That's exactly what it made me think of, is like you have this bag, it's made out of baseball glove leather, and it becomes kind of like a thing for you to talk about with people. It almost reminded me of back in the day when I went through like a phase where I was super obsessed with comedy. I read a lot of books about stand-up comedy and watched a lot of documentaries and blah, 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 blah. Point is, prop comics and like guitar playing comics are considered like the bottom of the barrel when it comes to stand-up. They are considered like the low man on the totem pole, because you're relying on an external object. It's like a crutch. It's like you walk up on stage with a guitar, or you walk up on stage with some goofy shirt, and the first joke that you make is like, hey, why am I wearing this crazy shirt? And it's like that. That's like a trope. It's like, well, you clearly wore that shirt in order to just make a joke about your dumb shirt. Yeah. But while that might be super cringy in like the world of stand-up comedians, I almost feel like there may be a trick there for people who feel an extra level of social anxiety in public scenarios and social settings, where maybe you do wear some kind of odd shirt or hat, or you have a baseball glove bag that you carry around, something to kind of serve as an icebreaker with strangers, where once you get over that initial hump of like, oh, look at my weird bag, or look at my hat, or, see a shirt like that every day, then you're engaged enough that the rest of the conversation is way less awkward. It's always that beginning that's the worst.
It is. And you're doing other people a favor by having something that makes it easy for them to talk to you. Okay. So if you have just anything, I mean, I've seen people do this really successfully wearing, like at VidCon, wearing t-shirts from like Nerd City and Gus Johnson, a lot of the ones that you wear, then somebody else, if you're hanging around, can just be like, oh yeah, I love Nerd City, or like the Gus like cat tiger design. Like, you can start a thing. You can push the start button on the conversation with a little kind of throwaway comment about that, that shirt. So you're giving somebody else a really easy way to approach you. And that's why the bag, which I got the bag just because I love this bag. And it's really useful in terms of traveling. Like the way the inside of the bag breaks down is good to me. But I realized immediately that, the first time I took it to an event, 3 people started conversations with me about it. That was awesome. It just made it easy for them to come up to me when they didn't have any idea who I was or anything. It was just like, hey, I like your bag. So yeah, when you think about everybody else being in exactly the same position that you're in, doing a little thing to make it easy for them to talk to you, that matters. And as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of some really successful ways that people have deployed what amounts to be a trick, even though they're totally sincere. And so it's kind of like clickbait, right? You don't want to be clickbaity in person, okay? You don't want to wear clickbaity things. But at the same time, you want your like conversational click-through rate to be very high. It can be tougher too when you want to talk to people who are like above your station in life. And that's a perpetual thing at events like VidCon, where small and starting creators are like, how do I go talk to iDubbbz? How do I talk to Phil DeFranco? How do I, whatever it is, like, how do I even do this? One thing that a couple Australian guys have done every year is Cakes by Choppa and Matthew McKenna and I forget who else. So Alonso Larone is with them. I don't know if he's part of this initiative, but they're always hanging around together at those events. And they do a charity thing where people, top YouTubers sign a thing, and then they go home and auction it off for this charity thing with YouTubers. And all of a sudden, there's a reason for them to go up to somebody super famous and just say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is our project. Here's the Sharpie. Do you mind? And yeah, like, who turns that down? And they look like they're doing a good thing. They look like good guys as they're doing it. So they've given people a purpose to receive their conversation. And, I forget the item. It's usually fairly large because it has to, in the end, accommodate a whole lot of signatures. But if you see somebody walking around with like a ukulele with 1 million signatures on it, like, there's a conversation piece. Mm-hmm. So it's just a good example of them having a thing to make it easy to talk to other people and easy for those other people to talk to them. And they look good, as they do it. So,
and also remember them by when they see them next year, because it only takes that one time.
Yeah, it was the first thing that I really saw. And actually, I met those guys because somehow I was talking to Choppa, and he pulled out a little koala. He had a bag. He carried with him a bag which was full of uniquely Australian candies and like little koalas that like grab onto stuff. And everybody he met, he threw this like 4-cent thing at. Mm-hmm. Immediately, conversation ready to go. And I happen to have a koala in my bag too, so I was like, yeah, we both have.
What are uniquely Australian candies, like powdered sugared tarantulas and rock candy, deadly venomous snakes?
So one of them was a powdered candy, and I remember this so distinctly because I had it in my bag, and we were at a thing. What is it? Mark of Key of Awesome.
Yeah. Mark Douglas.
Mark Douglas, right? And I was talking to him, and I was like, "Look, I've got this weird candy. Do you want some of it? It's like Lickamaid powder kind of thing, whatever." And he's like, "Yeah, okay." And so I put it in my hand and like threw it back like this. And like 5 minutes later, he's like, I gotta tell you, some of that white powder is still in your mustache just below your nose. He's like, you might want to take care of that because I know what it is, but other people could get the wrong impression.
And you're like, yeah, some strange Australian man gave this to me. I have no idea. I have no idea where it came from. He had a koala, we bonded. All of a sudden I was in the bathroom with him, and
but yeah, showing it, oh, sorry, go on.
I like the idea of having like a little stuffed animal thing, like maybe to take pictures with, or, that would be a fun thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A little thing that's relevant to who you are or where you come from, or, what your channel and stuff is about. At a certain point, it can get like weirdly promotional, like if you have a channel mascot or something, and You're asking people to take pictures of it. Well, they don't know what your channel's about. You know, they don't want to be like endorsing something super strange that turns out to be a prank.
There was a guy, I have a perfect example of this. There was a guy who used to walk around with this puppet, and his YouTube channel was like the puppet, and I don't remember what it was called. It was like Dr. Wacky or whatever. And he is exactly an example of what you're talking about, where it was obnoxious because he would come up to you, like talking to you as this puppet, but it was his gimmick. So it wasn't cute. It was more, like you said, self-promotional and very self-serving. And it's like, bro, like, I don't want to be in, like, on your YouTube channel with your weird puppet. Like that definitely came across to me as disingenuous. Like, you don't actually want to talk to me. You just want content. And like, I'm not interested in that.
Yeah. And I did the same thing with my little koala Jeeves, who I take most places. I asked Tay Zonde to because I was sitting next to him at one of the VidCon events, and I was like, "Hey, this is weird," and I actually made it weirder. Okay, and this segues into the point that I really want to make, because I knew, you know, not to put him in an awkward spot where it's like, hey, this is going to go on a billboard somewhere. I was like, it's kind of like the unofficial little mascot for my company. And like, but I'm not going to use this in a weird way. I promise this is like for my own personal gratification and use.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. In
You
hindsight, that's like 3 times.
Yeah. No, that's not the words that I would use at all. Personal gratification. Like, look, I just need to take this back to my hotel room.
Yeah, so
it's not like weird, trust me.
It was, you know, I just wanted to send it to like 3 friends, be like, oh, can you believe this? You know, I posted it on Facebook for friends only or something. But anyway, in hindsight, you know, I could have been smoother on that one.
Yeah, for sure.
And the point on that is that, like, you just have to do this stuff and get practice. Like, you just have to put yourself in those positions, both in person and online. It's really none of this stuff is different in a Discord server. You know, It's just not. You're still talking to people for whatever reason. It's easier to be ignored online. You know, somebody can read your message and never respond, whereas it's tougher to do in person. But the principles are pretty much the same, and you're going to do a bunch of cringy, stupid things. It's just going to go badly. It's going to be awful at some points. Like, you can take care not to make it super awful. You know, it's easy not to be a complete and total disaster and get like escorted out of the event. But you're going to look back on so many interactions and kind of facepalm. And then you'll facepalm a little less over time. And eventually, you know, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I'd like to circle back a second, thinking more about the networking gone wrong. Like the people that I've thought about over the years who turned me off from them have always been the people who, right out of the gate, it seemed clear that they wanted something from me.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't like a genuine kind of a general interest in like who I am or what I'm doing, or, hey, maybe someday we can do something together. No, it was like straight away kind of like, hey, here's what I want you to do, or here's what I want from you. And that doesn't go well. At least, you know, in my experience, like, that's not how I make friends. I don't make friends with people who instantly just want to use me for something. Like, that's not a friend. Like, that's not a good relationship I want to be in.
No, and I've said on other topics and other episodes, I've made parallels with things like dating and relationships, and networking is, man, it's just dating. It's long-term dating and short-term dating, and, you know, that same kind of thing. And if you put it in those terms, it's really easy to understand. So you're saying, and I've had this happen I've had this happen a lot. I actually think it happens a lot more to me than to you, where somebody wants something, because it's easier to ask me. Like, so as an example, the number of people who want me to hook them up with Michael or you or Jake straight out of the gate is shocking. I'm like, I don't know you. I can't, even if you seem all right, I can't in good conscience just be like, yeah, here's Kevin's phone number. Here's Michael's email. Tell him I sent you. What could go wrong? They want something that's too deep of a connection based on the 90 seconds we've been talking. That's a major turnoff when people want something, or like, I've seen people just straight out ask pretty big YouTubers for to do a collab with nothing that would warrant it. Like, they don't have any people in common. They don't know anything about the channel. Like, how do you think this is going to go? And it comes off as like, hey, I'd love for an opportunity to capitalize off your, fame and status for my own benefit. Going back to the very first thing, it's really like every interaction is really about the other person. And so that's the opposite of taking a sincere interest in what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. But would anybody go up to, a guy or girl and just lead by saying, like, let's talk about marriage? Or like 10 seconds in, even 10 seconds in, just being like, I'd like to go on a date with you. Well, that's going to creep people out pretty bad. And nobody would want to be asked that stuff either. It's really sensible to think you'd at least want to spend a lot of time talking and getting to know them before taking any kind of next step. That's the same way the networking stuff works out. And the Australia project here is a really good example of the patience required in letting that process play out. At that time, I didn't tell them, like, hey, man, I'm gunning for a chance to go to Australia. I'd love it. They did not jump at me and just say, like, let's work out a thing. It just wasn't like that. It was just, no, we talked about what we did and got along reasonably well. And it's like, hey, you'd love to, follow along with what you do, which it's so easy now with LinkedIn and Twitter and just even subscribing to YouTube channels. Just like, you don't even necessarily have to give emails anymore. There are ways to contact people. So you can do that. The next step might be months down the line, where you start talking again. And with Changer, they emailed me a few months later, and we started talking, about possibilities on that stuff, and then sorted it out. But that only worked like precisely because both sides were patient and did not expect anything on day one.
It's even weirder than your dating analogy, because with dating, you could have some sort of love at first sight, like intangible connection, some sort of chemistry, whatever that is. There's no collab at first sight. Like, that's not a thing. Really. You don't like instantly fall in business with somebody.
No, you really don't. And if anybody tries, it's probably going to go very poorly. Yeah. You're right, though. It doesn't work that way with creative stuff very often. I'm sure there are exceptions, but overwhelmingly it is the opposite, where it's about long-term, just knowing people's work and long-term stuff. How many people have we seen at multiple VidCons where it like the conversation kind of ratchets up here and there? Like you start with a 2-minute, like, wow, hi, this is, who I am. I love your stuff, whatever. And then the next time you see them, it's a 5-minute thing. And then the next time it's a 15-minute thing. And it just builds. right? And so that patience is, I think it's very hard for people to commit to that and even to understand it, because they're working so hard on what they do now, whether it's trying to get a job, whether it's building up a YouTube channel. They kind of want results now, and it sucks to say, trust me, the 18-month plan on this is way more effective.
Yeah, but it's kind of way more effective in all things. I mean, no matter what you're doing, it's very rare that you run into, like, think of the guests that we've interviewed. Almost all of them are like, yeah, I made like 1 billion videos doing this other thing for like several years before I figured out that like people really ended up liking this one type of content that I make. And now that's kind of what I focus on, or, you know, I've pivoted since then, but it's not like all of a sudden some sort of eureka moment and wow, everything is perfect. Like, it's just nothing really works that way. It does take patience. And I think that part of the reason why those long-term relationships work out is because all of the people who aren't patient enough sort of sift away. You're sort of separating the wheat from the chaff, and the people who are still around, who are still at that same level of like in mutual interest in what you're doing and what I'm doing and blah, 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 blah. It's like having an old friend, you know? Like, think of how many friends that you've had where you were great friends. Maybe you were like best friends, like sophomore year of high school, but then whatever, you grew apart and you don't really talk to them anymore, but you still have this handful of friends that even if you haven't spoken in 2 years, when you do see each other, it's like you just pick up where you left off. And I think that those are the type of relationships that everyone is looking for, whether it's a friendship or a business relationship.
So something just popped here, that a really good example of the long-term, patient, decent networking is not networking at all, but it's really Isaac in the Baby Gang and long-time Vsauce fan. He did not have a networking scheme 5 years ago when he was like just starting high school. It wasn't about that. But at different points at VidCons for a long time, he would come up to Jake and say, just like, I like what you do. This thing was cool, whatever. I don't think he probably ever really said much about his own videos, other than maybe, you know, like, yeah, I've got a channel and I do this kind of thing. But he was so clearly interested in other people. He did the same thing with you, right? Eventually, you guys got to know who he was. You know, you'd recognize him and like, oh, it's nice to see you again, because it was a pleasant thing.
Yeah.
Not only, I mean, it's obvious that that we love him, but at VidCon this year, Jake shouted out his channel on a panel. Somebody asked at the Q&A, somebody asked you guys what channels, what small channels do you really, really like? And, Isaac was on Jake's radar from basically networking effectively over a period of years. That's a tremendous success. And it happened because he was selfless, like decently social, didn't rush anything, never asked for any kind of shout out. Well, he gets it. He gets the shout out. So he does all the selfless stuff, and in the end, it ends up really paying off.
But he did also put himself out there, and that's something that, I've had trouble with in the past, and I'm sure many of our listeners have trouble with, is just putting yourself out there at some point, because you really have to, with the Isaac example, he would come to our Q&As. He'd come to the Vsauce Q&As at VidCon, and he always asked a question. He didn't just sit in the back and watch and then go home and never say anything. He would always be one of, a dozen people or so every year that would stand up and come to the mic and ask us a question. And you remember that person year after year, so that's definitely an integral part of it. And I think that that's probably the part that people have the hardest time with. So Oh, that reminds me of what I really wanted to say earlier is it comes back to questions. And it's like, if you have questions preloaded for social situations, whether it's so what do you do for a living? Or like, how'd you come to, get mixed up with whatever convention you're at? Who do you know here? Or whatever it is. I mean, you could come up with a half a dozen super generic questions to just stick in your pocket, metaphorically, that you can pull out to anybody that you meet, and you instantly do what you suggested, which is you start talking about the other person, get them talking about themselves, and now you're rolling.
If it's somebody too who's higher profile like that, you can always ask them what they're doing at that event. Like if are you on any panels, or are you doing a signing thing? Like anything that they are specifically doing at that event. And you can just say, like, because I don't want to miss that, So what's happening when you say that? You're basically going to that creator and saying, I really like what you do. I'm a fan. I want to go to the thing that's like the reason why you're here. And it's so important to me that I really want to make sure. I mean, you're right that there's just 5 or 6 little things that's like, who are you here with? Have you been here before? Like, people like to, if VidCon, for example, if it's their first VidCon, they love to tell you how excited they are to be at VidCon. If it's their 7th VidCon, they're excited to tell you about how they're so happy to be here for a 7th time. That's a really good idea to get 5 or 6 preloaded questions that honestly don't even come off as being preloaded. I'd never know with questions like that. They're just normal conversation.
And I think that sort of normal conversation comes naturally to some people, and to others it doesn't. And for those that it doesn't, then I think being a little bit prepared ahead of time will drastically reduce the anxiety once it comes time to interacting. Yeah. Now, I know that in our Discord, we had a bunch of questions.
We do.
Specifically about this topic that, I'd love to hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to throw a few out here. Well, the first one is from James, who, by the way, I hung out with James in Brisbane last week, and it was awesome. It was so cool to have somebody from the Discord, who I hadn't met before at all. It was just in town with somebody who you talk to every day in Discord. Well, like, why not hang out? We had a really good time out on Saturday night, so that was a lot of fun. He asks, can I host an episode? Andrew also asks, can I host an episode? So let me scroll up to the questions that aren't that. So actually Isaac started off, he said, is there anything to try before cold calling somebody? And that's a good general networking kind of thing.
But that's a tough question to ask, because I think it really depends on the context of like what the cold call is. I know that for a YouTuber, when it comes to brand deals, when it comes to working with different brands, at some point you got a cold call, because you don't know these people. You don't know the person who works at Dollar Shave Club from Adam, whatever. You have no idea. So if you have I guess it comes down to, if you have no way of getting an intro to who you are looking to speak with, well, then you got to do a cold call. And my suggestion for that, probably a cold email, not a cold call. Cold call is just kind of
email,
boomer leftover terminology. But cold email, my suggestion there would be to keep it brief, first of all.
Yeah.
Because, man, I get cold emails that are just like a novel, and it's like, look, I get 35 emails a day that are really important. If one of them is a gigantic novel from somebody I don't know, I don't have the time. Yeah. I don't have the time. I just don't. And people whose job it is to read emails and to vet things all day probably get 300 emails every day. So,
right.
So keeping it brief, keeping it concise, getting to the point,
Yeah.
I think is extreme. That's like priority number one as far as I'm concerned. And then priority number two would certainly be explaining who you are, why you're emailing, and sort of like what kind of value you bring to this potential future collaboration or relationship.
It's really time intensive, and it's really time intensive. But if you are a legitimate fan of what somebody is doing, get involved on that side before you contact them. And that works even for job type stuff. Like, retweet their stuff, share their things, comment on all of their Facebook posts and tweets and all of that. Like, names rise to the top in terms of familiarity, even if somebody has a tremendous amount of traffic. And so when over time they recognize that name as somebody who's stuck around. Like, I know that Kevin, I know that there are a bunch of names from people who don't make content on YouTube, but have commented on a load of Vsauce 2 videos over the years, so that they're known to you at this point, even though they haven't reached out. Well, if they did, the odds are better that you would recognize them. So if you do have to cold call, involve yourself in what the person or the company or the brand does. You'll be more familiar with what they're doing, so that cold call is going to be more effective anyway, because you're essentially researching where they're at. But yeah, just be a legitimate, or have a legitimate interest in them before you do it. And the cold calls are far more likely to convert, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. And also just expect a lot won't get returned. And that's just kind of the nature of cold emailing anyone. Is like, you got to send out 100 of those things to get a few responses usually.
Right. And really, really quick, another big theme that I wish we'd mentioned much earlier is that you just have to be comfortable knowing that very few of these conversations are going to lead to much. So if you go out trying to just make something important or useful out of every conversation you have, it's going to go really badly. It just doesn't work that way. I don't know how many conversations I had at VidCon this year. It's not like I'm going to everybody's country. No, I went to one. Like, one thing worked out. And guess how many things worked out the year before that? 0, So again, it takes a lot of time, and not much tends to happen. But you meet some cool people until something happens. So that's actually a question that we will get to. But Jeff Davis asked, what's your favorite and least favorite platform to network on?
Oh, favorite by far is Twitter. I love Twitter.
I agree.
There's
completely.
Not even a close second. It's like Twitter is way up here. It's like Twitter is like the Jerry Rice of receiving records. And then like everything else is like, Larry Fitzgerald or whatever, like way at the bottom at number 2 for a lot of reasons. I think that there is a level of irreverency on Twitter that makes it comfortable for everyone. Like, there's just a lot of kind of nonsense on Twitter where at least in my circle, I think there are probably plenty of circles of Twitter where people are on edge all the time.
Right.
Not the people that I speak with on Twitter. The people that I speak with on Twitter are there to have fun, to play with ideas, to poke fun at the world, and generally to like release stress and relieve stress and let off steam, rather than going there to like build up steam, which obviously also is part of Twitter. Yeah. But
what's your least favorite? I'm not going to say a whole lot about that, because I agree completely. Twitter is awesome to me. It's low stakes. It's fun. It's quick. You can have group chats that are amazing, where like-minded people are just hanging out. And I actually see really, I am going to say more about this. I see really exceptional networking happening within the group chats, where people are helping each other out. And it leads to good things. It leads to really good things. And in some cases, decent money for some of these creators. But their version of networking tends to be helping out the other people.
Mm-hmm.
So they give and give and give and give and give, and then maybe they get something from it. If they don't, who cares? They've done a good thing. They're having a good time doing it, and they've made some really good friends and contacts. But it's a platform where it's very easy to be a fan of someone and show your interest in them. It's easy to help them out even in little ways, like retweets. You know, I love when people retweet a Vsauce 2 video. Mm-hmm. It's not a big deal. It's not going to be 1 million views from their thing. I don't care. It makes me feel really good that they looked at your video. It's like, I want to show this to the people I know. So yeah, it can be that stuff. It can be the group chats and all that. You know, you can make a lot of really good friends on Twitter. Least favorite platform?
Yeah. The only other thing I would say about Twitter is that in my experience, people are more themselves on Twitter, I think, than they are on something like Instagram or YouTube. Because to me, Instagram and YouTube still fall kind of under this, it's content bubble. Like, here's my content. Whereas on Twitter, quite often, you know, you'll see Grande like go off on YouTube about like some policy or something. Like Grande is not going to make that piece of content on YouTube or on Instagram. You know, that's where like his jokes go. But on Twitter, he's kind of free, and so are many other creators, to really speak their mind on things in a way that other platforms are just not a good fit for at all. So with that in mind, I'd say my least favorite, if it's considered a social platform, would be YouTube. But I don't consider it a social platform. I consider it more like a media platform. So then my actual least favorite would be Facebook. I hate Facebook. I think Facebook is garbage. There's almost like nothing worthwhile on Facebook. It's this bizarre blend, at least for me, of like friends and family, along with some people who really aren't friends and family. They're more like extended acquaintances and like work acquaintances. I don't know. It's just kind of like a mess there. So I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook. I don't really use it. And I don't plan to anytime soon. I've thought about deleting my Facebook a lot.
Yeah, I barely use mine now. And it's a strange mix in terms of networking. You know, we talked about how you've really got to warm up to letting somebody in, right? It's going to take a long time to build a relationship like that. On Facebook, even when you add somebody straight away, it's like immediate access to a lot about them. And that's a little strange. It's too much too soon in a lot of cases.
It is weird. Yeah. Cause all of a sudden it's like, well, now you and my like aunts are going to like comment on the same thing. Like it's an awkward platform. So that's why I don't even really use it, because it's like, I don't really get anything out of this. If I end up doing something that I think that my family would love, like my extended family, like my immediate family knows what I'm doing. I don't need to post on Facebook for them to find out what I'm up to. But my extended family, they don't know what I'm doing. So like, for instance, the Navy thing. Yeah. The Navy thing I posted on Facebook because I knew that my uncles were going to be into that. And they were. They loved it. They all watched it. They all loved the video. I don't know if they watch any other Vsauce 2 videos at all, but they loved Kevin going on the submarine. That was cool to them, so I shared it on Facebook. That was a good fit for it, but otherwise I just stay away.
My least favorite networking platform is Snapchat, because they allow you, Kevin, to have that premium account, which, you know, your premium Snapchat is just, I don't know how it's legal. I don't think it is.
Have I told my Snapchat story? I did, yeah.
Oh,
didn't I tell my Snapchat story where I downloaded it to watch Hank Green unbox the Curiosity Box, and then I didn't understand it, and I deleted it within half an hour.
I'm sure that some of the visual networking sites are good for that. or rather, they're not networking sites. I'm saying, like the Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok and stuff. I'm sure there are people who do network effectively from those, but that's so far outside the realm of what I do that, I just don't understand fully how to do that. But I'm sure it exists. But yeah, I'm pretty much on board with everything that you've said about this. Yeah.
I've made friends on Instagram. I've made friends with artists. Kidmograph. Kidmograph is somebody who I became friends with through Instagram because, his art is on there. So I follow a lot of artists. So Instagram is like is like the Larry Fitzgerald to the Jerry Rice of Twitter for me. It's like great career, Hall of Famer, first ballot. But, Twitter is definitely by far the GOAT. I think
I'm sure
social
it
networking.
fits. I'm sure it fits when somebody's doing visual stuff. The visual platforms are a great fit. So when I think of it in the broadest context, like generally, like I don't know, but yeah, with the artists and creatives as well, like it's pretty good actually for what a lot of I think the people listening are probably thinking about.
Yeah.
So this is a real question. And it's one that actually matters. I have to very quickly think of a word to substitute. So James asked, when networking, are you willing to, or do you think it's appropriate to, tolerate complete wits? I can't think anything of anything like that's a perfectly good fit. In order to get ahead or to make new connections through them. And then is it, possible to drop them? There are a lot of jerky people in networking, like people who you don't necessarily want to have any kind of long-term relationship with. That's definitely something that comes up a lot. And it came up a lot in, my career before YouTube stuff. Like, it's a weird ethical question, isn't it? Like, if somebody can be valuable to you, effectively, do you like use them to get to the valuable thing? What do you think about that?
I don't have a lot of experience with that, I don't think, because, like, first of all, there's just not a lot of people that I don't like. I'm just not the type of, like, I don't know. I'm not like that disagreeable of a person to write people off, like, for the most part. Even if it's somebody who I'm like, I don't really like what they do, or I don't really like their temperament, or, the things that they say. For the most part, I'm like, I don't really care. They don't bother. Like, it doesn't affect my life that much. They can do what they want. Now, with that said, I usually do avoid those people. Like I'm not going to go out of my way to try to get something from somebody who I don't genuinely like. I don't think I've ever done that.
Right.
And I don't know even how I could stomach doing that. So I'm sure there are people who that may be a good fit for, like they could just sort of coldly pretend that they like somebody enough to extract value from them. But I'm not going to do that. Like, life is too short to spend my time with somebody who, like, I don't want to spend my time with. There are plenty of people who I genuinely love and who I don't get to spend enough time with as is for me to ignore them to deal with somebody who, like, I don't even want to, be around.
So you're right about how it's a major challenge with doing that is that you can't be genuine. You can't be sincere about being interested in what they do.
No, no.
If you hate them straight away.
It's like, wow, I hate you. Tell me more about yourself, you piece of crap.
So we actually, I've got to skirt around this, but Kevin, you and I had this problem a few years ago where there was a guy who we kind of wanted to work with on paper could have been a really good situation, but we didn't like him, did we? I'm not giving enough detail for you to probably remember, but we had an encounter with him where he did something that we can't still to this day, like many years later, can't decide whether it was very rude and awful or whether it was kind of awesome.
Okay,
Do
we're
you know
going to
what?
have to talk about this after the podcast because I have no idea what you're talking about at
Okay.
all. I just blocked this out of my memory. My memory is bad enough as it is. I don't remember this. No. But I'm guessing that we didn't work with him.
We didn't. We did not work with him, but we didn't really like his approach on stuff, and that was kind of a non-starter because of that. Because we're like, well, is it worth dealing with this to get to the good stuff? Like, no, there are 10 other ways to the good stuff where you're not feeling terrible about the conversations you're having or the social parts of it. So I'm sure there's a chance that something comes up where you have to deal with an unpalatable person to get to a better one. But I think it's extremely rare, and I think most of the time it's not going to work anyway.
Yeah. I don't think so either. I can't wait to hear this story offline.
You know,
I don't remember it, man.
It involves a custom meal. Does that?
No, a custom meal?
Somebody asking at a restaurant to have a thing made for them in a certain way.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't you just tell that story? I mean, not like obviously enough details for it to be clear, like who we're talking about. I don't think anybody would know him anyway, but I think it's safe to say what annoyed us in that situation. Well, I'll just say that I worked in the service industry for like nearly 15 years. Nearly 15 years. It was like 13 years. I worked in the service industry in restaurants, in bars. I did every single job you can do in a restaurant except manage one. And this person treated the waiter. We were having a meal, and this person treated the server really poorly. It was almost like being in a movie or like a TV show where some like jerk Wall Street guy is like, like mistreating some underling. You know what I mean? It was almost like some like big boss, tough guy who was like rich, like waggling their cigar, was like abusing their like butler or something. Like this guy was just so unnecessarily rude to this server to make this waiter give him a thing that was not on the menu.
There is nothing close to it on the menu.
There's
a combination
to it
of ingredients that they surely had in the kitchen. So it's not like he was like, go down this. Actually, was that a component of it? Didn't he say at one point to like run to a convenience store and like buy the one part if they didn't have it?
Oh, I don't remember.
I can't remember.
Detail.
But it was that level of crazy. It wasn't, like, can you make it without this? No, it was like, can you construct this thing that's not even on the menu? I know that you can do it, so just go get it done. And he was kind of terrible about it. And the request itself, even if he'd been perfectly polite, it would have been a bit strange. But I've read things about people using this deliberately as an interview tactic for potential candidates on jobs, that they'll go to a restaurant and then ask in advance for the restaurant to make a mistake on an appetizer, so that they can see the way the person they're interviewing, the candidate, reacts to that problem, how they treat the server. It's some low stakes thing like, I really want to get this as an appetizer, prearrange that precisely to see what they do in the situation we're talking about. And it's generally accepted that if you're a nightmarish person to customer service people, that's going to show up in other parts of your life. But that was a really weird thing. And we were in a position where it's like, hey, do we want to do a thing with this guy? Because it will lead to some pretty good stuff. And we eventually just kind of didn't, right? It just wasn't going to be viable in any way.
If you're going to work with somebody, you really should, I think you should like them, or else it's gonna go badly. If not today, then tomorrow or a year from now, if some horrible blow up occurs, because it is a relationship. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a romantic relationship, but it's everything else without the romance. You really have to deal with each other's strengths and weaknesses. And if that dynamic is such a turnoff for us of somebody like mistreating a waiter that way, it's like, I don't want to do anything with this person. I don't even want to have another meal with them. Like, good luck, goodbye. You're not a nice person, and I like nice people.
Everybody likes nice people, and the rule on this stuff is that a guy named Jeffrey Gitomer, who wrote some books on sales, a lot of books on sales, and he has this one line that just applies perfectly, and it's all things being equal, people like to do business with the people they like, but all things being unequal, they still prefer to do business with the people that they like. So having the good relationship and flow, and just having somebody like you is a huge, huge thing. If you're like a generally likable person, you don't have to be the life of the party at all. You just have to be a decent person. If you do that, you're not super weird. You do the things you say you're going to do, and you make deadlines. Like, you are a hero. You are absolutely going places. You're in the top 10% of whatever industry you're in by default. It's nuts. I felt that way, going into the workshops, especially the younger people and newer people. They want to know, like, what's kind of the silver bullet that's going to make my stuff blow up and like make me successful and this and that. 90 seconds, you can say most of the really important stuff, and it's that list that I just threw out, and most of those components we've talked about before here. Like, it's shockingly simple. And the networking part is just that easy person to talk to kind of thing. You can get experience on that stuff just by going to little get-togethers about other things, other like businessy things that are local, like before you go
or just
to a
things
VidCon.
that you like just conventions that you're into, like a Magic the Gathering convention, or
Absolutely.
some like horror movie convention, or anime, or whatever it is. That's way lower stakes, but still a lot of the same basics apply, and you're just kind of strengthening those muscles, and that's really what it's all about. Well, that ended up being a really good discussion. I'm super glad that we went through that stuff. Do we have more questions to answer for the patron only section?
We do. There are two options on this. If you want to have that section, yeah, let's do that. Let's do the rest on the other side.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, I hope that this was helpful to everyone, no matter if you're a budding YouTuber or a musician or a comic book artist, or just a fan of all of those things and want to go to these conventions and meet the people who you're a fan of. Ultimately, I think that the basics apply across the board, no matter what angle you're coming from. And at the end of the day, it's like everybody feels awkward in these situations. You're not alone.
Yeah. They're all in the same position you are. I mean, that's the really crazy part here, is all the anxiety and the what do I do? Like, how can I make this work? Everybody else is thinking the exact same thing, except for like 10 people in that room who already have it made. And even then, they face their own challenges with networking. Like, as I've seen this, I've witnessed this. I'm certainly not, famous myself, but I know a bunch of famous people, and I see the way they experience things like conventions. Man, it's way easier to be a nobody and try to get deal with the stuff that we've been talking about than it is to be the high profile one who has to still network effectively. It's really difficult in so many ways, and I wish that's something that we should get into at a later date, because it's actually, even though most people are unlikely to be in that position anytime soon, it's really fascinating and at times hilarious to
For sure.
to hear about some of it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll discuss that in a later episode. For now, we're going to head through our Patreon wormhole. We're going to hit some more of our patrons' questions. If you want to head over there, just go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown. That's where we will be. If not, that's okay. Until next time, we will be here. We will see you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Until then, see you, Space Cowboys. Thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. There's more episode waiting for you, but to keep listening, sign up at patreon.com/thecreateunknown. You could hear the rest of our conversation, get exclusive content, join the Idea Baby Gang, and more.